Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. If you time, on Moroccan time, just make sure that all panelists are seated and comfortable. Felipe, I'm going to call you because I know your names. Can you please come in? Call anybody else that's there so we can get started. So I hope you all had a very full meal last night. You had enough food to eat, and you had a great dinner. And some of us are struggling to wake up because it's a lot of jet lag. So, without further ado, I would like us to pay attention to our wonderful panelists this morning, moderated by Fifa Rahman from Malaysia, and she will guide us through this morning's session before our tea break. Thank you.
Somebody turn my, okay, there you go. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure today to be moderating this session on trade-related intellectual property, which has historically been dominated by the US as the primary demander, and then the Quad. And today we increasingly see the EU and South Korea and Japan. Of course, the US was the primary demander in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is then followed by Japan, and then we have all the EU agreements which are threatening access to medicines, and more recently the RCEP. So given that we're slightly delayed, I'd like to begin quite quickly and introduce Loon Gangte, who has been involved with ITPC since 2006. He serves as founder and treasurer of the Delhi Network of HIV-positive people and actively lobbies for treatment access. Mr. Gangte has helped ITPC and DNP Plus play a leading role in resisting free trade agreements that threaten production of affordable generic HIV medications in India. Loon, you have the floor.
Thank you, FIFA. And thanks to the organizer also, and giving me, for me, this is very historic. Yeah, last night we have a party, have drink and drunk, and get slows, and after that, the next morning, to be the first speaker. I'm very privileged to speak among the hangover. So, and I look at the program, and during the next 3 days, we have one of the world's best IP gurus in the room. And I don't think that the organizer want me to teach them all this, Professor Brook or Jamie or our Minister Mohammed or German or Francisco or Gopal or Kazal or Lena. Everyone is knows inside and outside of what this IP is and who is trading whose life. So I don't think that those who make the program wants me to tell them how bad this TRIPS or TRIPS plus provision is or bilateral trade deals are. So, because many speakers who are talented and who knows inside out the subject anyway has covered and will cover in the next coming day. So, which give me a free room to speak whatever I want, which till now I don't know what I'm going to speak. But anyway, I'll try to speak something which may not be spoken here. during the last 3 days or during these 3 days. Maybe something outside the topic, it could be, but something which is in my mind, in my heart, which is bothering me. I would rather want to touch on those sides rather than going to technicalities of the TRIPS plus provision, who is trading and why we are trading and who is trading. Yes, all the TRIPS plus provision and all the bilateral trades which the risk country, the US, EU, what they are proposing is, what they are trading is, and what we tell to them is, yes, trade whatever you want to trade in this world with my jacket or my belt or my pants or my car, but you cannot trade our life, my life. Once you trade my life, you are going to trade my life. We are not going to sit and say, okay, do it. We're not going to say that. We are going to stand up and resist and fight back to you, even though our government may stand with you, but still you need to sign a deal with the community, which will never be. So this is something which we are very clear, because what? This day, the package come in very different form. I just tell to FIFA, the package come in different form. The bomb is still a bomb. But sometimes they pack it in FTA, sometimes they pack it in TPP, sometimes they pack in RCEP, sometimes they pack in whatever thing. But if you peel the cover inside, there's a bomb, and the bomb to stop the generic production. And we are not against this, or we are pro generic company. No. Gilead's company, give us in $200, we will not buy Aurobindo or we will not buy Cipla. We'll buy your product. But your products are very high. That's why we want all our people to be treated, so we always go to the cheaper company. That's what we're doing. So I'm not going to tell all these things, but what is in my mind is yesterday in the morning, I don't remember exactly, but I do capture his slide. And one of them is the fragmented civil society response. That one is, I think, I really want to take it on that, want to substantiate on that presentation. Because while our enemies, big pharma and multinational companies and all these big countries' government, they're trying to do it through WTO, through TRIPS and TRIPS plus provision they could not do. They're trying to do through bilateral trade and multilateral trade, which they're not so successful. But they're not trying on this side only. Yesterday, as a speaker clearly identified, I want to say that, I want to warn you that maybe you already know, that they are also penetrating to us, to the civil society, among the civil society, so that our intervention is fragmented. We are not together anymore sometimes. So this is something which we need to be very careful. These people are smart, these people have the money, these people have the power. So that's why I call on the civil society, at least those who are in the room today, we talk about flexibilities. Let's not be flexible in many things, but let's not be flexible at least in our principle. Sometimes we are too flexible, because if we are too flexible, then that causes fragmented intervention among the civil society. So let's focus on our objective. When we look at the people, we see them as the organization or the key population that they become, or the country where they become. Then there's a fight among them. But when we look at our objective, we all want to achieve the same common goal. That is to save people's life. That is to get medicine in the hands of people. When we look at the goal, there's no fight. But when we look at each other, there's a fight. So I want to challenge all of you again to let's focus on our objective and our goal, so that we can be together. Because our goal is same and there's no time to fight. But when we move our focus out of our goal, then there can be fragmented in the civil society response, which is dwindling and getting down. And then our opponent, the big pharma, takes opportunity in that. And not only that, how they penetrate is, I believe, I don't know, I'm a very, very small-time community local player, but I believe that they come through the funder also. Our opponent is trying to come inside through us, trying to fragment it through the funder by giving us money, so that we could shut our mouth, so that we don't protest anymore, so that we don't file parent opposition anymore, something like that. So let us also be very, very careful to which funder we are dealing with. Again, when we are dealing with the funder, when it's difficult to say no, but look at your objective and say yes or no according to our goal and objectives, then it's very easy to deal. Otherwise, trying to sustain your organization, trying to sustain our movement, we will...
2 minutes, Loon.
According to me, 4 minutes. we will, yes, I'll finish. We lost focus on who we are. So, this morning I want to say that while our fight, we have much more intellectual people than our enemy, the multinational, all of them put together, then the civil society, we have better brain. They can never win us if we are together. So the only thing that is required is for us is to be together, the South, the East, the West, from wherever country we are, because we have a common objective of access to treatment, which is eventually access to getting medicine in the hands of the people, which is stopping the virus replication in my body that produce billions of copies per day in my body. That is all of us, our objective. So let's focus on our objective. So then there will be no more fight, and then there's no way our opponent could win. So far they have been not winning us, and we have been winning them. But I'm afraid, and I warn you again for the last time, that they seems to be penetrating us and divide us. So knowing that, let's not divide and let's fight against our enemy and look at our goal. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Loon, for your intervention. Couple of comments. I don't think you're a small-time player. The second thing is, it's definitely true that these trade agreements just keep coming in different packages and in the same, more or less, format. And we've got to figure out how to empower government officials to be stronger against demanders who have played the game for so long. So thank you so much. And perhaps we can explore in discussion how civil society can help empower governments to do that. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mohammed Saadi, who is an economist, independent consultant, former Minister of Social Affairs and Family in Morocco. He's a research fellow at Preston University and UTA in Texas, and a former expert on gender and development at the United Commission of Africa. Mohammed, you have the floor.
Merci, bonjour. On m'a demandé de parler de la relation entre les accords commerciaux et les droits humains. Et en fait, bien sûr, je vais parler rapidement de la région méditerranéenne, mais je dois dire qu'il n'y a pas de relation entre la conception qui est à la base des accords commerciaux et des droits humains, tout simplement. Parce que les accords commerciaux sont basés sur le libre-échange, donc sur l'économie mainstream, sachant qu'il y a plusieurs écoles de pensée économique. Donc le mainstream, c'est la concurrence, c'est les mécanismes du marché, c'est la croissance économique qui va se traduire par des trickle-down effects et qui va donc permettre l'accès aux droits humains. Ce que nous avons vécu depuis les années 80, c'est tout à fait le contraire. Et donc, on a constaté une régression manifeste des droits humains du fait de l'application des politiques néolibérales. Et ce dont on a besoin, c'est d'un rapprochement entre les défenseurs des droits humains, les activistes de la société civile et les économistes hétérodoxes. Parce qu'il y a, comme je l'ai dit, il y a d'autres écoles de pensée économique que l'école néoclassique et donc des économistes qui ont le souci de la justice sociale. Mon deuxième point concernant les accords commerciaux, c'est que actuellement la région Est et Sud-Méditerranée est l'objet d'une compétition féroce entre l'Union européenne et les États-Unis pour l'accès au marché et pour l'investissement étranger. Et dans cette course-poursuite, les États-Unis ont marqué des points, spécialement pour ce qui est de l'industrie pharmaceutique. Et la part de marché de l'industrie pharmaceutique européenne a beaucoup baissé durant les années 2000, comparativement à celle. Et dans la région, les États-Unis ont pu avancer leurs intérêts à travers les accords de libre-échange signés avec la Jordanie et le Maroc. Plus spécialement pour ce qui est donc de la protection intellectuelle. Et donc l'Union européenne est en train maintenant de vouloir nous imposer de nouveaux accords commerciaux qui nous feront aligner sur ce que le Maroc a accordé et la Jordanie ont accordé comme avantage du type TRIPS plus aux États-Unis. Ce qui est proposé actuellement par l'Union européenne, donc c'est ce qu'on appelle les DCFTA, Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreements, ou ALECA, accord de libre-échange complet et approfondi, et dans lesquels on introduit des questions qui n'ont rien à voir avec le commerce. C'est ce qu'on appelle les questions de Singapour, Singapore Issues. La protection de l'investisseur étranger, l'accès aux marchés publics locaux, l'application d'une loi de la concurrence similaire à celle qui est en cours en Europe, et puis bien sûr la protection intellectuelle, les droits de protection intellectuelle, donc les TRIPS plus. Donc c'est ce que cherche à nous imposer l'Union européenne. Je dois dire que on n'est pas sûr, enfin du moins officiellement on ne connaît pas ce qui se passe, parce qu'il y a un blackout total sur les négociations. Donc est-ce que vraiment c'est TRIPS plus? Je peux dire oui, parce que j'ai eu accès à une information confidentielle en discutant avec des gens à Bruxelles, il y a 2 ans. Ils m'ont dit tout simplement, ce que vous avez accordé, vous, Marocains, aux États-Unis, on voudrait l'avoir en matière de TRIPS plus pour ce qui est de l'ALECA. Parce que l'ALECA concerne aussi le Maroc et la Tunisie. Ce sont les deux pays qui sont cibles, qui constituent la cible actuelle, avant bien sûr d'élargir ces accords à l'Égypte et à à la Jordanie, puisque ce sont les pays les plus liés actuellement à l'Union européenne. Le problème avec les cas et avec l'accord de libre-échange entre les États-Unis et le Maroc, la Jordanie, c'est qu'il y a très peu d'études d'impact qui ont été faites sur les conséquences de l'application des TRIPS Plus au Maroc et en Jordanie. La seule étude à laquelle j'ai pu accéder, donc sur Internet, concerne la Jordanie. Et par contre, pour le Maroc, du moins à ma connaissance, il n'y a pas eu d'étude d'impact de l'application de l'accord de libre-échange qui a été signé en 2004 entre le Maroc et les États-Unis. Pour ce qui est de la Jordanie, de l'accord avec la Jordanie, c'est très simple. Un impact négatif pour la Jordanie, pas pour les États-Unis, bien sûr. Un retardement de la concurrence des génériques pour 79% des médicaments introduits sur le marché jordanien entre 2002 et 2006. Le système de santé publique et les individus ont eu à payer plus cher les nouveaux médicaments du fait de l'absence de concurrence de la part de produits génériques. Il n'y a pas eu de nouveaux investissements étrangers, de nouveaux investissements de la part des firmes pharmaceutiques en Jordanie pour développer des médicaments avec les firmes locales. Cet accord n'a pas incité les firmes jordaniennes à s'engager dans la recherche et développement pour les médicaments. Les nouveaux médicaments lancés sur le marché jordanien ne constituent qu'une petite fraction de ceux lancés en Europe et aux États-Unis et ne sont pas à la portée du citoyen ordinaire. Les TRIPS Plus ont contribué pour 20% à la hausse des prix des médicaments entre 2002 et 2006. Ces hausses auront un impact négatif sur le système de santé publique et porteront préjudice aux Jordaniens les plus pauvres. Ça, c'est donc les conclusions de ce qui s'est passé en Jordanie. Et j'imagine que l'impact ne devrait pas être très différent au Maroc. Et donc, ce dont on a besoin aujourd'hui, c'est de nous mobiliser tous et toutes pour que l'ALECA ne passe pas. Et donc, notre combat actuel doit être effectivement concentré sur pour faire barrage quant à la possibilité de faire passer des accords de protection intellectuelle du type TRIPS Plus dans ce qui est proposé comme négociation entre le Maroc, la Tunisie et l'Union européenne. Et c'est quand même un peu triste de voir qu'on est en train de se battre sur la question des TRIPS Plus, alors qu'on devrait demander une remise en cause totale des TRIPS eux-mêmes, pas seulement les TRIPS Plus, parce que les TRIPS ont permis aux firmes pharmaceutiques d'être présentes à la table, d'être présentes à la table des négociations dans le cadre de l'OMC. Et ce que les États-Unis n'ont pas réussi à faire passer, et l'Union européenne n'a pas réussi à faire passer à Marrakech en 1994, ils ont essayé, ils ont tout fait pour faire passer leurs intérêts à travers les accords bilatéraux et régionaux de commerce. Merci.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you for mentioning that agreements today are primarily deep integration agreements that are no longer about market access strictly, but more that go deeper into say financial services and e-commerce and the environment and that kind of thing. In my own research on the TPP, it's clear that while there clearly are still market access concessions, like dairy for biologics exclusivity or pineapples for biologic exclusivity, increasingly the trade-offs are as to the perceived benefit of being in a club, for example. So that's really interesting that you mentioned that. Moving on to the next speaker, Daniel Pinto was born and raised in Rio. He has a degree in business administration with additional studies in diplomacy. He joined the Brazilian Foreign Service in 1999, and since 2016, he has been the head of the IP division in Brasilia.
Hello, good morning. I'm very pleased to be here. Allow me to say merci beaucoup au Royaume du Maroc for this hospitality, and to ITPC for the invitation. It's a privilege to be here with such great references and specialists in the field of IP, and I'll try to show how helpful you have been to us in government for these negotiations. I will be talking mostly about the ongoing Mercosur-EU negotiations. So just to put it into context, Mercosur is a large bloc, but it's of course poorer than the EU, less populated, and all of you know about the challenges facing us, like an industry in need of modernization, and of course the inequality, the public health challenges. People have been talking about this, and you know all about it. I would just call your attention that we need to export a lot of agricultural products to build our current account surplus. So what's been going on in the Mercosur-EU trade talks? They started in 2004. In 2000, I'm sorry. They were interrupted in 2004 because of very poor offers. They resumed in 2011. In 2011, actually, we started having the IP discussions, but we made it clear from the start that we would have no TRIPS plus. And again, when they resumed for the last time last year, in October 2016, actually, we made it clear that public health would not be under discussion. Well, this is a recent interview by Ricardo Melendez Ortiz from the ICTSD, and he raised some important points which I think it's important for everyone here to have in mind. Europe has been negotiating with Canada, now with Australia and New Zealand, which are also agricultural producers. So we really have no option but to try and ensure market access to the European market. But as Ricardo says here, it's important to have a good agreement. The thing is, we have to negotiate with them, otherwise we will be losing seriously. But we have some challenges in these negotiations, and we now start talking about IP. We are not as consolidated as the EU. Our interests and legal systems between Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Venezuela has been suspended, but I'm counting them in the block, of course. The interests are not always harmonized. We don't have Mercosur-wide IP regulations, and we'll be talking about this now, but there is no overall study of the IP impact in the economy and society. There are logistical obstacles to internal coordination. It's not that I can call someone from another country and have a beer in Brussels somewhere. It's complicated. We don't have much joint negotiating experience. So actually, this negotiation is going in two separate tracks. We are negotiating with the EU, and at the same time, we're making sure we are building and sustaining confidence among ourselves. So what do we have in our favor? Lessons learned from past experiences. If you haven't read this book, I recommend it strongly to you, Information Feudalism. The authors put it on the internet, available for free. They show how the developed countries like US, EU, Japan coordinated intensively with their private sectors as well. They had very large delegations and technical expertise, which we didn't have. and closed-door deals were the rule during the Uruguay round. We have to bear in mind all the time that IP, different from other chapters, is, as I say, a different animal. If you give something to the EU, you're giving something to everyone, and you are forced to change your law as well. It's for everyone. But as we all know, it's been said here, IP is sensitive. Whatever you do in IP needs a lot of internal debate, democratic debate. You cannot decide anything on IP based on just, as I said, closed-door negotiations between small groups. And the lack of legitimacy, if we were to address TRIPS flexibilities in this agreement, would affect the FTA as a whole. And of course, if there is no legitimacy, there is no legal certainty. And if there is no legal certainty, what's the point? It doesn't make sense. So what did we decide to do? Define joint goals and red lines, ensure close coordination, closing ranks always around the most sensitive member in each issue, and hold close consultations with academia, civil society, NGOs, private sector, think tanks, and we especially included our own demands. We focused on technical aspects all the time. We defined IP as a single undertaking, even though geographical indications and the other IP were on different negotiating tracks, but geographical indications is in the interest of the EU, so we are keeping everything together. We are trying as much as possible to use agreed language from previous FTAs, and there is something very encouraging, at least in most FTAs, language on flexibilities like the Peru-Colombia FTA and others, and offer alternative solutions as much as possible. And let me give you a quick example on this. The EU has requested Mercosur to accept that in the case of administrative delays for commercialization of medicines and agricultural products, that we would accept to extend the patent term accordingly. Daniel. So we said, okay, you are concerned about administrative delays, so are we. Let's find an administrative solution to this, but let's not touch patent terms because it doesn't make sense to mix administrative procedures with intellectual property. The two things have nothing to do with one another. So let's focus on administrative solutions. Well, now it's time to talk about you. We've had a lot of technical support. Pedro Villard is here, Felipe Carvalho, and two valuable people in this table are here involved in this too. And what I say is that political pressure from civil society is essential, but technical support is just as essential. So I'll be talking about the Fiocruz study right now, but I can tell you that it provided solid argumentation and motivation for the negotiators to reject TRIPS plus proposals. This is another book which tells about the story of the role of civil society in the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and I think everyone should read this whenever they say that civil society is a nuisance or real innovation comes only from the pharmaceutical industry and civil society is just bothering us. Let us do our work quietly, and it's not true. This is what you have to have in mind. The EU negotiators, as I said at the start, they have a clear goal. The methodology of this EU IPO study is very debatable, but an EU negotiator goes to the table with 82 million jobs on his shoulders and 5.7 trillion euro. You can question this, but this is what they have in their minds when they go to negotiate. What do we have? We have our spirit, the wish to protect, but now we are having something else as well. thanks to Marcela and Gabriela, who could not be with us today, Brazil had a study showing that if we adopted the additional TRIPS plus measures the EU was proposing, we would spend an additional $400 million a year in public health. And the chief negotiator for Mercosur a couple of months ago raised this study and said these figures to the EU negotiator. So this has an impact. He said, I have in my hands here a study which shows that we would spend almost $500 million more per year if we were to accept this. How can I accept this? So this is very powerful. This is extremely useful for negotiators. Argentina, I think I'll let Lorena present the study, but she's here, she was in charge of that, and she'll be talking about this very soon, just as... there is something else. We have to know the other side. We are learning about ourselves. We have the figures more and more to support our positions, but we have to know what's going on in the EU. So we have our diplomats there, and we have experts. You probably, most of us, heard about Javier Seuba. He has been retained by Paraguay as an expert and an advisor, and he's very aware of changes in the EU normative landscape. And we realize that sometimes what they request in their FTAs does not always correspond to the practice within their countries. I'm very close to finishing here, don't worry. There is one more thing you have to have in mind. It's not good policy to just react. Okay, we included very important principles in the draft texts. If we have to have an IP chapter, so let's put the TRIPS preamble, which says that intellectual property rights are private rights, the Article 7 and 8, which you all know, the Doha Declaration, and Article 31 bis, with which people have been talking about this, the protection of biodiversity, which is very important for Mercosur in the fight against biopiracy, and the mandatory disclosure of origin of genetic resources in patent applications. This is a main lesson, and this is to conclude this talk. Intellectual property is not a bargaining chip. Other sectors have clear, quantifiable, concrete interests. We don't yet. Like, if you're talking to someone from agriculture, he could talk about the number of containers of wheat he could be exporting. So this lack of clarity about what's at stake in IP jeopardizes efforts to preserve our policy space. Civil society must therefore continue to raise awareness and put political pressure. Academia and researchers must provide impact studies based on hard data. And Marcela, thank you very much for your role, and Lorena as well, and all the others who were involved in these efforts. Negotiators must be mindful of their responsibility towards present and future generations. I think Brooke Baker put it very well yesterday morning. And always bear in mind that once TRIPS flexibilities are given away, the cost of recovering them is huge and probably unbearable. I don't think there is a single case we could cite as an example. Well, thank you very much. Merci, shukran. And I hope this was useful.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
I think your presentation shows that the challenge really for Mercosur is to make sure that the standards are harmonized as per Latin American standards, because the EU often talks about harmonization of IP standards, but they're talking about their standards, not yours. So, and it was also great to hear that your acknowledgement of the civil society role, which is fantastic, and you demanding certain, because we often talk about the EU and the US as demanders, but not really developing countries, but it's great that you're demanding principles that are going to preserve the Doha Declaration, so that's fantastic. And let's move on to Maria Lorena Di Giano, who's a lawyer, who specializes in human rights and HIV/AIDS and is an industrial property agent. She is the Executive Director of Fundación GEP and General Coordinator at Red Lamb. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, and thank you for the negotiator for such a recognition of our work. I'm going to present a study, an impact analysis that we perform on the intellectual property chapter that was leaked because, as it was said here, the negotiations is in secret, so we don't have access to the text. And when we start analyzing, for example, these TRIPS plus measures, what we do is to analyze free trade agreements that have been already signed with other countries or regions. So in this case, we got this leak test at the end of 2016, and we realized that there was an intellectual property chapter that includes TRIPS plus measures. Well, to give some background or main characteristics of this agreement, was something here, but I want to give some numbers. This agreement will affect 27% of the global GDP, 11% of global population, 15% of global good trade. Well, negotiations began some time ago, were installed in 2004, and were resumed in 2010. But even the agreement is still in negotiation. The negotiations were accelerated with the new governments in Argentina and in Brazil in the last, I would say, months. The agreement includes various chapters. It includes goods, services, investment, and public contracts. And also there are many areas under negotiation. Within them, we have, as I said, intellectual property chapter. Well, EU is requesting Mercosur countries to adopt international treaties that, as you see, most of our countries have rejected or not adopted. Well, to go to the TRIPS plus measures, we found that there is a measure that would hinder the access to medicines, is the exhaustion of intellectual property rights, the principle that once the product has been sold in a market, the intellectual property owner no longer has any rights over it. And the importance of this measure is that it is a parallel importation. And what we found is in this intellectual property chapter, there are restrictions for the use of the parallel importation. Also, as our colleague from Brazil said, there is also a TRIPS plus measure is an extension of the patent term linked to the delays in the procedures for granting registration for commercialization of a product. This linkage is really, as he said, unacceptable. Also, there is data exclusivity. In Argentina, for example, we don't have data exclusivity. We only have TRIPS that grants 20 years of patent exclusivity, but we don't have data exclusivity, so this will be really harmful for our people. Going to the study we perform, we work with a basket of 17 antiretrovirals and direct action antiviral drugs that are procured by the national aid programs of the Ministry of Health. The analysis we did was using the intellectual property rights impact assessment. IPRIA is a methodology that was developed by the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development. This is a very interesting methodology that was used by other civil society organizations in the past. So it's good because we are like testing the methodology. We did a projection of 30 years, starting in the year 2020, assuming that, because we received information that this agreement was going to be signed in 2017, like in December of last year. So assuming that, we started our analysis in the year 2020, because it will be enforced in more or less in 2020. So we work with 4 different scenarios. The first scenario is the status quo. Is what we have now, that is the national patent law that grants 20 years of exclusivity, and as I said, no data exclusivity in place in the country. This is the first scenario. Then we use another scenario that with a patent extension in place, if we sign the agreement. It considers the additional protection of 2 years extension proposed by the EU to the Mercosur in the chapter intellectual property. There is another scenario that we consider the data protection scenario, since the proposal does not for the purpose of this study, we use previous FTA signed by the EU, and we assume that it would be, because there is no definition yet, but we assume that it was 10 years. And the other scenario, you don't see the whole, the whole text, but the other scenario is the combination of the patent extension and the data protection. So the numbers, as you see, here we put some years, not all, because, well, for a sense of simplifying. So in the status quo scenario, we have, as you see, from 2020 to 2050, we have an increase in the price of the medicines. This is because we use historical economic trend, and we use the rate of the dollar and also the inflation. So that's why you will see that there is an increment or an increase in the price. So this is the baseline you use, and then we compare in the other scenarios how these prices will be affected by the TRIPS plus measures. So in the patent extension scenario, well, 2020, the patent is granted, so it has 20 years, so the impact would be in the 2050. So you see that this measure would increase 4.1% of the price. In the other scenarios, you see that we have increase of 25.5 in 2015, and also in the total exclusivity scenario, we have even 30.5%. Well, this is an exercise we did in the analysis, and we assume that if now, with the current legal frame that we have, adding these TRIPS plus, will have been the situation of 6 identified drugs. So we found there are 4 drugs for HIV and 2 drugs for hepatitis C. And we found that the budget would increase in 72 or 73, almost $73 million. So if in 2016, under the patent law, the total Ministry of Health expenditure for the HIV and viral hepatitis is 113 million, imagine if we need to increase only for 6 drugs, 73 million. This is a figure that is more, I mean, impacts the people who knows that what will happen. So the study is showing that the prices of the medicine would dramatically increase with the adoption of TRIPS plus measures included in the IP chapter that EU is proposing. So I finish with this slide. I want to show that we have here, and maybe my colleagues from Fundación FGEP will give you a copy. We have a Spanish version and also a simple photocopy because we had just last week the English version. So if you are interested, you can go more in detail into the methodology and also into the numbers. Thank you, and I give my email if you want to make some comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorena. I found that incredibly powerful data that it takes, it's another 73 million American dollars for an additional 6 drugs. That's amazing. I'd like to introduce the next person. Marcela Viera is a lawyer with specialization in human rights and in IP and a master degree in public health. And she has been working with access to medicines issues since 2005, mostly with CSOs in Brazil. And today she is an independent consultant working on the same issues. You have the floor.
Thank you, FIFA. Thank you, FIFA, for the presentation and the moderation. Thank you, the organizers for having us all here together in the room to discuss many issues to move forward with the access to medicine agenda. And well, thank you all for being here today. I will do the opposite as some of my colleagues from the region did yesterday. I have my slides in Spanish, but I will be speaking in English. So, yeah. I hope it's okay to allow everybody to follow. So I think I will go a little bit faster because how do I press this? I'm sorry. Okay, the green one. Okay, because we use the same methodology as the Fundación FGEP used to their study in Argentina. So I won't go into much details about the methodology. I just want to say that the Brazilian study is also available online on the Access IPSA website. That is the project that's being funding this study. It's a project funded by the Shuttleworth Foundation, and it's a project about access to medicines in India, Brazil, and South Africa. And in Brazil, we've been working together with Fiocruz and the Department of Pharmaceutical Assistance, NAFI. So this is a joint publication by my colleagues of Fiocruz that Jorge Bermudez is here today, but Gabriela Chaves, that are also involved in this study, could not make it, so I will be presenting on behalf of the whole team. Okay, so as Lorena already said, there is this proposal of the European Union that was made public. This one was not leaked, actually, they put it public on purpose. There is also other chapters of the FTA that was made public in the end of 2016. And I think it's important to say that we only looked at the intellectual property chapter, but there is also lots of measures that can be harmful for access to medicines that are negotiated in other chapters. So it's also important to have a look at those chapters as well whenever we have a chance to see, especially the investment chapters, and I'm sure there are many other people here that have been doing great studies about the threats for access to medicines that we can find. So, but we did see that in this chapter for the intellectual property rights, there are some provisions that can be harmful for public health purposes. And Lorena already went through them. The 3 main ones. There are others also that can be harmful, but the 3 main ones is basically the one that can affect parallel import, the one that proposes the extension of the term of the patent, and also data exclusivity. And most of these we don't have in our laws yet, as Lorena showed. Well, in Brazil, we do have already the intellectual property and the exhaustion of the IP rights, we already adopt the national regime. So we focus or study on the new ones. So that one was not really included in the impact study. And then we also have an extension of the patent term that's in the Brazilian legislation, but it's a different one. It's due to the time of analysis of the patent application. This one that's being proposed by the EU now is due to the time to obtain the market authorization for the medicines. So we focus our impact studies on these two measures, the new extension and on the data exclusivity that we don't have yet in Brazil. So the objective was to try to see both what it would be in terms of increasing the public spending in medicines in Brazil, and we also tried to look in what could be the impact in the national production of medicines. So it's important to say that, as was mentioned before, these provisions, they would impact all the pharmaceutical sector, all the medicines, but we did not do an impact study looking at what could happen for all. We only looked at the ARVs and the new ones for the hepatitis C, and I will explain a little bit later why we chose these two. So the methodology that was used was the same that was developed by João Rovira and Miguel Cortez, the IPRER model that has also been used for the other impact analysis studies done in the Latin America region. And it's based on these scenarios methodology. So in the Brazil study, we produced 5 scenarios. One that is the scenario if nothing changes, what would happen. That means that in that scenario, we consider the TRIPS plus measures that's already in the Brazilian legislation, because as I mentioned, we already have some of them. In the alternative scenario 1, we did a simulation of what would happen if Brazil excluded the TRIPS plus measures that's already in our law. That is the extension of the patent term due to the delay in the analysis. So it could be a way of showing the impact of a TRIPS plus measures that's already adopted. And we calculated that for the ARVs in Brazil, most of them can be or will be or already have been extended under these provisions, the patents, and the extension time has been calculated for the ARVs in 5 years of extension, and in the case of the hepatitis C medicines, it was calculated in 4 years. So this is the first scenario that we did. In the second scenario, we calculated what would happen in case the new proposal of extension was being adopted, the one that's being proposed by the European Union. And we also looked in the reality of the Brazilian analysis of the patents, and in the time that the Brazilian Drug Authority takes to issue the market authorizations, and we saw that this extension would lead to a patent term extension of 4.5 years in case of the ARVs and 5 years in case of the Hep C. In the alternative scenario 3, we simulated what would happen in case of the data exclusivity being adopted in Brazil. We simulated 2 data exclusivity terms because they don't really say for how long data exclusivity would have to be adopted in their proposals. So we simulated a scenario with 5 years and another one with 8 years. And the alternative scenario 4 is the one that puts together everything to see what would happen if the EU proposal was adopted with all the measures. So this is the slides that simulates that brings the variation in the different scenarios. I won't go through all of them because I see that my time is going very fast. But you can see here that in case of the ARVs, we would have almost 5, this is in Brazilian reais, I'm sorry, I didn't change it to US dollars, but it's about 3 to 1, now 3 Brazilian reais to 1 US dollars. And then it shows clearly the impact in the ARVs and the impact in the hepatitis C, and this is where I would like to spend just a little bit of more time. This is also the impact of in the domestic producers' production of medicines for the ARVs in Brazil, showing also that it would decrease the production and the sales of domestic production. So there would be also a negative impact in the industry. So it shows clearly that the adoption of TRIPS Plus, this is nothing new, but we already been saying it for some time, but it's good to have the numbers based in the concrete reality of what's going on in the country. So it would lead to the increase of the public spendings in medicines, and also to the reduction of the domestic production sales. And more importantly, it would also reduce the little space that we still have available to try to go around the negative impacts of the TRIPS agreement. And we talked a lot yesterday about the flexibilities of the TRIPS agreement, and we all know in the history of the TRIPS negotiations that it said that the pharmaceutical industries and those that were pushing for higher standards of IP protection, they got 95% of what they want during the TRIPS negotiations, but they were never happy with the 95%, so they keep pushing for this other 5% in the bilateral and the free trade agreement negotiations. But we still both to try to put the TRIPS Plus measures, but also to reduce the policy space that is still available under the framework of the TRIPS agreement. And what was, I think, one of the good results of this study that we did, that we looked separately for the ARVs and for the hepatitis C. And what we could see is that in the ARVs, there has been, in Brazil is well known for that, for the adoption of different strategies trying to reduce the negative impact of the IP protection. So there has been historically different strategies that was used both by the government, by the public laboratories, and also by civil society organizations in Brazil that didn't manage to completely remove the negative impact of the patents, but it managed to reduce the negative impact and try to make it possible to still have access to all the ARVs that we need in Brazil. So the impact studies shows that the impact of the TRIPS Plus measures would be less in the case of the ARV, in the ARVs, because we did manage to have some policies in place to reduce the negative impact. But when we looked in the hepatitis C medicines, we've been seeing that it has not happened in the same way. There's less coordinated strategies being used to try to reduce the negative impact of the IPs in the Hep C. It's a little bit what Lottie was saying yesterday, that we kind of won the battle for the first line ARVs, but we are losing it for the cancer ones, and now we are increasing our fight around the hepatitis C, but we still don't have the same success in reducing the impact of the IP medicines in the hepatitis C case. So it's also important to say that the TRIPS flexibilities, they have been working. They are not the solution, but they have been playing a role in making it possible to still provide access to ARVs in having less impact than could have done if these flexibilities have not been adopted. And we still have to increase the strategies for the hepatitis C so we can have access to those medicines, because we see in Brazil, even if we have a universal health system, that the hepatitis C medicines have not been available to everyone in need because of the high prices and the exclusivity. So I think this is a good thing, a good lesson that we can draw from this study. So, I mean, this is some of the recommendations that we did, that is to don't reject completely any of the TRIPS plus measures that are being proposed. We also recommend the Brazilian governments and others of the Mercosur countries that are involved in the negotiations to try to do a more throughout impact study, a more comprehensive impact study of the agreements in the public health and in the human rights, because as I said, we only looked for the ARVs and Hep C, but the impact is much broader than that, and Danielle mentioned that they have not done an impact study yet, so maybe it's time to do one before moving forward with the negotiations, to have it more clear of what is at stake. Also, for the negotiations should be transparent as possible, because as Lorena mentioned, most of them are under secrets, and we don't have access to all the proposals that are being made by both sides. And also for the governments to try to remove the TRIPS plus measures that are already adopted in the national laws, because they are already producing negative impacts for public health and for access to medicine. So I will end here to leave some room for the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marcela. In the interest of time, let's move on quickly to Oksana Kashyntseva. She is the head of the Center for Harmonization of Human Rights and Intellectual Property Rights. She is also associate professor at the Taras Shevchenko National University in Kiev in the International Property Department. She's a consultant for the All Ukrainian Network of People Living with HIV. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear friends, on behalf of Intellectual Property Research Institute of National Academy of Law Sciences of Ukraine, let me stress that we appreciate the UNITAID and ITPC and UNDP support of Ukrainian patent reforms. We are very appreciative that we are together in such difficult historical period of my country. And Ukrainian patent reform is really intervention to the, let's say, relaxed old order, when Ukrainian patients are the objects to generate profit, but not the subject of negotiation. You could remember the tragic events which had happened before the signing of Ukraine-European Union Association Agreement. We had to pay a great cost for this, and we still pay it because of the intervention of in the east of Ukraine. So let me provide a brief historical review why Ukraine had to sign TRIPS provisions. It was very strategically important and is important for Ukraine to be the member of WTO. And from 2008, we are the member. And Ukraine signed TRIPS agreement on the basis of TRIPS plus provision because we need such membership, and we need to have such membership before one country which has not friendly attitude for Ukraine. The legal collision of TRIPS plus provisions and human rights was and is obvious for Ukraine's society. Until the present time, we had not enough political will to implement TRIPS flexibility provisions into the national legislation. So it caused the following situation. You could see the Pearson index of patents in the sphere of healthcare in Ukraine. It's a big Pearson, 5 and 8 Pearsons. It looks like Ukraine has very innovative medicine, but unfortunately, it isn't true yet. Let's compare this situation with our close country, Georgia and Moldova. Moldova has much worse situation. Georgia has very similar situation for us. So let's combine this situation with European countries. For example, Austria and Germany. We have differently another situation in Austria and in Germany. And if we will compare all these countries together, we could see that the most patentable sphere in healthcare is in Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia. And we also could compare other close countries. So looking for this situation in 2012, it was founded the Center for Harmonization of Human Rights and Intellectual Property Rights. It's the first center in the East Europe, and I'm very thankful to the National Academy of Law Sciences that they believe in our activity and support us. So, Ukrainian-European Union Association Agreement deals with the main spheres of IP, and the Committee in Trade Configuration deals with economic reforms and intellectual property reforms. It's obtain the capacity to provide reform in patents, biotechnology, geographical names, where we have also serious situation, trademarks, copyright, neighboring rights, and you know that the big part of the national reform of Ukraine is establishing the intellectual property code. Let's say about the Article 218, which is not a gift for Ukraine, because the same provisions we have in association agreements with the European Union in Georgia and in Moldova as well. So it shows us that European Union Association Agreement respect public health, respect patients' rights, and we could to looking for balance. On October last year, we have very important high-level political dialogue on IP and access to medicines, which has been provided by the support of our Ministry of Health and WHO. You could see the group of experts, and some of them are in this hall. We are very thankful for such support. And you can see the Ukrainian experts. The most key ministries are presented: the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Economic Development of Health, Ukrainian Patent Office, which is very important for us. And we obtain such important recommendations from WTO, not only on slide, but on official letter, which is very helpful for us. This letter will be issued both by the WHO and UNDP office. Thank you very much for New York. And draft law, we have now draft law on amendments to certain legislative acts of Ukraine, on improvements the legal protection on inventions and utility models and at all. Yes, and the main part of is deals with patentability criteria, excluding from the patentability object the patent of method and diagnostic. And you can see, because we have not enough time, the other issues which are implemented from TRICS flexibility provisions. So the main difficult part of our draft law is the necessity to implement the Article 220 Supplementary Protection Certificate. But we also can balance between TRIPS flexibility and this article, because we remember many examples, and one of them is a Truvada case in European Union. It's the article, draft article of our law. We will submit it in our slides for all participants. And what we try to do is, first of all, to use the European Union countries' experience on implementation of supplementary protection certificate, which has to be based on the basic patent. The second one, the protection shall be granted only to the invention on basic patent, only by the owner, and what is very important for us, only if the application of market authorization has been provided in Ukraine within let's dream 1 year from the date of first marketing authorization in the world. So welcome to the innovative drugs to Ukraine, but not all the greening patents. The real term of supplementary protection shall be exceed the term of the procedure of marketing authorization and not more than 5 years. It's a very negotiable issue, and we have the reply of draft law positive from UNDP, WHO, Committee of Medical as Pharmaceutical Law and Bioethics of National Bar Association, and negative, you can see our opponents. It's not a surprise. And another most disputable issue of our draft law is the criteria of patentability and excluding from the protection of new forms or known from the state-of-the-art medical products. We are very thankful to Professor Carlos Correa, who step-by-step provide us with the content of this article. And we are very thankful for Boyan Konstantinov from UNDP to support us in drafting these provisions. So, excluding the new forms, old forms, and supplementary protection is very important. The new challenge for Ukraine is the harmonization of IP law, unfair competitive law, and the right to access to medicine. When we have researched the experience of European countries in the sphere of compulsory license, we were shocked that too many compulsory licenses there are. It's the first. And the second is that most of them, all of them, let's say all of them, are based on the legislation in the sphere of unfair competitive actions and in the sphere of protection of consumer rights. So in Ukraine, we also would like to have such provision, and we have a political will. We provide, thanking to the network of Ukraine, thanking to our partners, which you can see there on this beautiful hall. We provide the negotiations with the State Secretary of Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine, and we have a letter of support that we could submit, organize the working group to working out such legislation. I would like to clarify that we have unfair competitive legislation. We have the anti-monopoly legislation, but they have only general provisions which do not work in, let's say, level of molecules, level of drugs. They do not work on pharmaceutical market. So our further steps in patent reform under the European Union Association Agreement and keeping in mind the TRIPS flexibility. Strengthening the patentability criteria, work out the compulsory license procedure ex officio. We have such working groups. Thank you very much for our Ministry of Health of Ukraine and to our Ministry of Economic Development and Trade. Exclude patent linkage from the pharmaceutical legislation. It's also our goal. And work out antitrust legislation in the sphere of pharmaceutical markets. Let me give you very briefly one example from Poland, industrial property law. We also were surprised when we see the article, we can see the translation about the abuse of intellectual property rights. We have asked our colleagues from Poland, have they many practice to implementation of article? No, they have not, but they have such provision, and it's a good achievement. And let me finish by the words of Indira Gandhi. The idea of the better order world is one of the which medical discoveries will be free of patents, and there will be no profiteering from life and health. And let me remember yesterday's message that life is not negotiable. Thank you, our partners. Thank you, UNITAID. Thank you, ITPC. Thank you, UNDP, for the support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Oksana, for illustrating how governments try to mitigate detrimental IP provisions, including by involving international IP experts which are involved in access to medicines. I'd like to introduce Sergey Kondratyuk now. He's a legal specialist on access to treatment at the All-Ukrainian Network of People Living with HIV, where he has served in the last 7 years for the procurement and supply team. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'll try in my presentation to show a little bit what happens when those harsh TRIPS Plus provisions are taken by the country as an international obligation and included in the national law. So we had an example. I'm sure most of you heard about litigation of Gilead in Ukraine on data exclusivity on sofosbuvir. So I'll just briefly remind you of some details of it. So while we are having war in the east of Ukraine, there is a silent war in courtrooms, or not so silent, in papers, which is happening on medicines. And it was happening, well, it still continues. I got some news, which I'll go later. I'll tell you later. So due to ongoing patent opposition, there were several of them on patent applications that Gilead filed in Ukraine, around 5 applications. They couldn't get a patent, but still they were only one on the market. When Farco, their representative, Europharma, managed to enter Ukrainian market, register their drug in Ukraine and start competing with Gilead in state tenders. And as you can see, the price dropped almost twice in a very short period when generic entered the market. And then Gilead started very, very active work in filing lawsuits, filing notification on investment case, going to even onto monopoly committee now. So you see that the price a little bit grew to $750 per treatment course. That was the standard price of Gilead, but Gilead should have dropped their price for Ukraine. Because at that moment, most procurement organizers didn't want to buy the drug because of chilling effect that lawsuits and letters of Gilead to Ministry of Health and everyone around were making on them. So nobody wanted to buy from Farco when the mess started. So as was mentioned, or maybe not, Ukraine had introduced data exclusivity starting from 2009, and it was due to accession to WTO in 2008, where we got this obligation in accession protocol. Then we again repeated it in EFTA free trade agreement in 2010, and then finally EU association agreement made it, like, for the third time an international obligation for Ukraine. So as you can see, it requires from Ukraine that we provide data exclusivity for 5 years. The good news is that it is not 11 years like in EU, but there is a provision saying that from the decision of the trade committee that previous presenter Oksana mentioned, trade committee that is supervising the implementation of EU association agreement, from the decision of this committee, Ukraine has to fully harmonize its data exclusivity regime to 11 years, just like in EU. So Gilead went to court when they find out that they had to compete with Farco on one of the state tenders, and they lost this tender. And they went to administrative court saying that Ministry of Health had infringed the regimen of data exclusivity, and it should cancel registration of Kondratyuk. This is a trade name of generic sofosbuvir in Ukraine. And the court decided otherwise. They said that basically, as Farco managed to file their application several months before the Gilead, and that they did not use directly the registration dossier that was in Ukraine, they relied on some data from, I suppose, other jurisdictions or literature reviews. So there was the right for data exclusivity didn't appear for Gilead at that moment. That's why Ministry of Health, in court's opinion, was correct when registering the drug. And that was it. So Gilead went to appeal with this case, but appeals court was not also very much prone to satisfy their claims. And in parallel to the litigation, they also filed the investment notification to our Ministry of Justice. So this is a pre-dispute resolution of investment case, which is like the parties first need to have some arbitrage in the country. If they will not conclude an agreement, then they go to the court or to international arbitrage. So they based their claims on a US-Ukraine agreement on protection of investments of 1994. This agreement covers intellectual property and confidential business information. It treats it as an investment. And any citizen or a company can file a claim against a state to arbitration institution to seek for compensation. So basically, these are quotes from the notification of Gilead to Ukraine. So Ukraine had not been fully protecting investments of Gilead, and they claim that they estimate their damages in around $820 million that they will claim from Ukraine. And they said that the investment is that Savaldi is an important part of Gilead investments in Ukraine that were made according to the investment agreement, which is any representative office in Ukraine. They have just a small distributor working in Ukraine. So it's hard for me to understand as a layman what was the investments in Ukraine. So the settlement agreement, which was signed in January 2017, it canceled the market authorization. But the good thing is that Ministry of Health also forced, in a way, to do that. They managed to fix the price. So they agreed that the price will be $250 per bottle during at least 250, so it could raise in the future during the period of data exclusivity. And for pharmaceutical market, for pharmacies, it's 100 more per bottle. This is the moment of signing the agreement. And new developments is that in December 2017, Farco won the lawsuit in first instance court on restoring the registration of sofosbuvir. But most probably it will be appealed by Gilead. And when we had negotiations, like we met with their European representatives to talk about the license that they announced for Ukraine, and they strictly said that they don't want anyone except Indians that are already in the license. They are not going to extend their license on sofosbuvir to any local manufacturers in Ukraine or to any Egyptian company, as they don't want Farco in Ukraine at all. For them, this is a principal case. And Gilead served the Antitrust Committee of Ukraine with application on investigation of concerted actions, which I'm going to look in Friday, but I don't know what's happening, what they're trying to say with this. And as a final remark, I want to say that there are good mechanisms, some maybe things to do to mitigate the data exclusivity. For example, Ukraine couldn't get rid of it at all, which is bad. So we had to introduce a window for enjoyment of data exclusivity. So the company should file registration dossier in Ukraine for the marketing authorization within 2 years. If company misses this period, then no data exclusivity. Maybe also we have in our legislation that in case of compulsory licensing, the data exclusivity could be overcome and it's not applicable. But thank you.
Thank you, Sergey. Thank you for that presentation, which really illustrates how civil society and everyone alike must focus also on investment provisions in trade as well as IP chapters. Let's move on to Javier Llamoza from Peru. I don't have your bio, so if you could start your presentation with a short introduction of yourself, that would be great.
Buenos días. Gracias por la invitación. En principio, mi presentación está en español y también voy a hablar en español. Cuando miré la lista de quienes estábamos presentes, para mí es un placer ver muchas personas intelectuales que conocen y dominan todos estos temas, pero también me siento un poco contrariado con muchas cosas. En principio, porque queda claro que cuando firmaron los países el ATPIC y reconocemos este sistema de patente, y todos ustedes saben que este sistema de patente ha fracasado para los objetivos por los cuales fueron elaborados. La innovación y el desarrollo no está respondiendo y en la medida en que sigamos aceptando que como consecuencia del monopolio que otorga las patentes y el monopolio con los altos precios, pues siempre habrá nuevos mecanismos que busquen este objetivo para la industria farmacéutica y por lo tanto los acuerdos comerciales buscan eso, buscan nuevas formas de monopolio para seguir exprimiendo a través del precio los bolsillos de los países y los ciudadanos. Entonces no podemos seguir aceptando nuevos mecanismos, no podemos seguir aceptando la ampliación de las patentes, no podemos seguir aceptando protección de datos de prueba, eso queda clarísimo. Lo que sí siento aún este malestar es porque ¿qué nos toca a los países que estamos en estas negociaciones? Si sabemos que la exclusividad no sirve para los temas de salud pública, no sirve cuando se trata de medicamento, entonces nos toca a los países calcular cuánto afectaría a los países estos acuerdos comerciales. ¿Ok? Entonces aquí hay muchos intelectuales y la pregunta es, ¿cuántas herramientas tenemos para calcular el impacto? Y hasta ahora solo escucho el método IPRIA. Y el método IPRIA tiene también defectos, pero es la única herramienta más valedera que hasta hoy tenemos. Pero el método IPRIA no me involucra datos epidemiológicos. Por lo tanto, tiene ahí algunos defectos que es una exigencia desde nosotros, activistas. Soy activista, soy farmacéutico, soy un técnico en la materia, y cada vez que veo esto, y veo acá muchos intelectuales, exigiríamos, y es un deber, elaborar nuevas herramientas que me puedan mostrar cuál es el impacto real de estos acuerdos comerciales porque exponen la vida de los ciudadanos. Esa es una deuda y tenemos que resolverla. Nosotros, cuando el Perú negoció con la Unión Europea, hizo un estudio, IPRIA, demostramos cuánto necesitamos de presupuesto adicional y si no se daba ese presupuesto adicional, cuántas muertes iban a haber en términos de VIH, en términos de cáncer, etc. Y la Unión Europea tuvo que retirar su capítulo de propiedad intelectual cuando negoció con Perú. Cuando se negociamos con Estados Unidos, lamentablemente en nuestro país no confiamos en los negociadores, ¿no? Porque cuando tenemos gobiernos con una política neoliberal agresiva, pues dudamos de nuestros negociadores y cuando negociamos con Estados Unidos, pues nuestros negociadores se entregaron a nuestro país. ¿Ok? Aceptamos ampliación de patente, aceptamos patente de segundo uso, una serie de cosas increíbles. Pero cuando este acuerdo con Estados Unidos fue al Parlamento estadounidense, los demócratas revisaron y felizmente enmendaron el acuerdo y retiraron todo y nos quedamos con la protección de datos de prueba para productos de síntesis química, felizmente. Tenemos desde el 2009 a la fecha protección de datos de prueba para productos de síntesis química. ¿Y cuánto ha servido? Solo ha servido para que haya monopolio para medicamentos que no sirven, medicamentos Me Too, porque ninguno de los protegidos son esenciales. Entonces, ¿cuánto ha servido este mecanismo de protección de datos de prueba? Hasta la fecha, y en los últimos 3 años, sí se han incluido algunos medicamentos que salvan vidas, como por ejemplo Sofosbuvir. Tiene protección de datos de prueba y por lo tanto el competidor no entraría, y creo que la historia de Sofosbuvir ya todos ustedes por su alto precio que tiene. Tenemos un TPP, que es interesante la historia, porque para movilizar necesitamos evidencia, y la evidencia hay que construirla y necesitamos herramientas que tienen que avanzar cada vez más. Como le dije, el método IPRIA es el mejor método que hoy existe, pero también tiene sus deficiencias. Y también sabemos cuál va a ser la respuesta de la industria a este método. Va a decir, bueno, este método es recto, este método no involucra esto. Sí, pues, pero es lo mejor que tenemos. Y tenemos que seguir avanzando en nuevas metodologías. La siguiente, por favor. Next.
3 minutos, Javier.
Uf. Yo lo puedo hacer en 3 minutos, el tema está si me pueden traducir. Sí, yo hablo bastante rápido. ¿Ok? Yo no bueno, voy a avanzar esto porque esto es un ejemplo de cómo el monopolio afecta el precio del medicamento. Hemos tenido hay varias formas de cómo demostrar esto. Yo quiero avanzar porque ya me dijeron que tengo pocos minutos. El caso de Atazanavir fue un caso emblemático donde el Perú pagaba un alto precio sobre una patente que nunca se debió dar, porque es una patente de una sal, es una patente que en otros países no se debió dar. Sin embargo, Bristol Myers Squibb nos cobraba alrededor de $10 cuando el medicamento costaba 0,50 céntimos de dólar en otros países. Estamos en un proceso de licencia obligatoria, que esto ha movilizado a la gente y hoy en día, si bien es cierto, no tenemos licencia obligatoria, hemos logrado que el país ya no compre y busque otros mecanismos y, por ejemplo, ha hecho que Brasil nos done en 3 oportunidades y con las donaciones de país a país no hay violación de derecho de propiedad intelectual y, por lo tanto, hoy hemos logrado que el país no compre y el ahorro que el Perú ha tenido más o menos han sido de $13 millones en los últimos 13 años. Bueno, estos son varios ejemplos de cómo los altos precios que tiene el medicamento, este cuento que nos dicen que con el precio podemos recuperar los costos de investigación y desarrollo, cuando en realidad son, si alguien me dice, paga el alto precio para recuperar los costos de investigación y desarrollo, la pregunta sería, dime primero cuánto es el costo de investigación y desarrollo, cuánto vienes recuperando para ver si seguimos pagando el alto precio. Si no hay esa respuesta, ¿por qué seguir pagando un alto precio? A ver, quiero avanzar sobre estos temas porque ya me dijeron que me quedan 2 minutos. Hay 2 minutos que le sobraban a Lorena. Lorena, 2 minutos más. ¿Sí? TPP, negociaron 12 países, accedieron, me lo decían, cuando se negocia con el TPP vamos a acceder a un mercado de 800 millones de consumidores. Falso, pues el Perú ya tenía acuerdo con 6 de los 11 países, por lo tanto nunca iban a ser 800 millones de consumidores. Accederemos a un bloque que representa el 40% del PBI. Falso, pues será un bloque que representa el 40% del PBI, pero el estudio que hizo el Banco Mundial dijo que el Perú solamente crecería en un 0,7% como consecuencia de si se aceptaba el TPP, ¿no? Las pymes ingresadas a la cadena de valor, falso, pues Perú tiene muchos acuerdos comerciales y la cadena de valor no ha resultado como se quería. En el TPP, ¿qué quería los 12 países y el Perú cómo se vería afectado? Pues tendríamos patentes de segundo uso. El Perú hoy día no tiene patentes de segundo uso y el Perú aceptaría las patentes de segundo uso si este TPP se aceptaba, ¿no? Aceptarías una ampliación del periodo de patente donde si la oficina de patentes se retrasaba, tendríamos que añadirle más años. Si la oficina de sanidad se retrasaba en otorgar el registro sanitario, se aumentaría los años necesarios para convalidar el periodo de la patente, ¿no? Entonces, todas estas cosas nos pusieron, nos comprometían a hacer cambios dentro de la legislación andina, porque Perú, como Colombia y Venezuela, forman parte de la comunidad andina. Quiero llegar a la parte de la movilización. Nos pedían protección de datos de prueba para productos biotecnológicos, ¿no? Esto que hay que mirar que el presupuesto se nos va a ir ya no en productos de síntesis química, sino en productos biotecnológicos. Y eso tenemos que mirarlos. O sea, si bien es cierto, tenemos que seguir estudiando y ampliando los datos sobre VIH o hepatitis C, pero los productos biotecnológicos son los que están secuestrando la mayor cantidad de presupuestos de nuestros estados. Y ahí otra vez meto IPRIA porque no podría calcular esto porque son de reciente ingreso al mercado. Ahí hay un problemita que tenemos que solucionarlo rápido. Bueno, estos son textos que no quiero entrar en el detalle porque el tiempo me va a ganar. Lo cierto está en que este TPP también nos decía, miren, tenemos que darle las facilidades para que la industria pueda recuperar sus costos de investigación y desarrollo y que cada 10 años tenemos que revisar este acuerdo para evaluar si realmente los costos están recuperándose, ¿no? O sea, si no sabemos cuántos son los costos, ¿qué vamos a recuperar? Pero cada 10 años el acuerdo nos obligaba a revisar lo que estábamos cediendo para asegurar si estaban logrando el objetivo que se esperaba, ¿no? Eso es una cosa de locos, este TPP. Si bien se hicieron muchos estudios, el gobierno cuando negociaba el TPP sabía si había un efecto negativo, sí sabía, pues, sí sabía. Hicimos un estudio con el método IPRIA para calcular lo que significaría si aceptábamos solo la protección de datos de prueba para los farmacéuticos, y pasábamos de gastar de $350 millones a $1.400 millones en el 2030 si aceptábamos ese acuerdo comercial, ¿no? Entonces, eso era clarísimo. El Ministerio de Salud hizo un estudio de impacto, utilizamos este método IPRIA, calculamos esto. Este fue el estudio, el Ministerio de Salud no estaba de acuerdo, volvió a hacer otra vez otro estudio, contrató otro consultor y el consultor llegó a lo mismo, así es que este era un resultado innegable, ¿no? Aquí esto es parte de la historia que rápidamente también quiero contarla, es que el Ministerio de Salud, me refiero a DIGEMI, al órgano que ve medicamentos y este estudio, dijo, no, pues el acuerdo comercial, el TPP sí va a afectar el acceso a medicamentos, pero la política comercial decía, no, pues esto acá no puedo hacerlo porque va a entrar en contra de las políticas comerciales, y por lo tanto elaboraron un segundo estudio, un segundo informe, donde decía que el TPP sí beneficiaba al país. O sea, el Ministerio de Salud decía eso, mientras que el órgano técnico decía iba a afectar. El Congreso dijo, bueno, el Congreso de la República quiero saber si va a afectar o no, y el Ministerio de Salud evacuó un informe de 3 páginas diciendo que esto sí va a ser beneficioso comercialmente. La sociedad civil no nos quedamos contentos porque nosotros sí sabíamos del estudio grande que decía que el TPP sí iba a afectar el acceso a medicamentos, pero ese informe nunca llegaba al Congreso formalmente. Entonces lo que se hizo es ir al Congreso para que haya un evento donde invitara, no al Ministerio de Salud, sino invitar al órgano regulador específicamente, ¿no? Entonces hay toda una movilización política para que realmente fueran los técnicos de la Dirección General de Medicamentos y Insumos, expuso en el Congreso, y cuando llegó al Congreso se presentó por primera vez en más o menos marzo del 2017 y dijo, pues sí, pues el TPP sí afectaría el acceso a medicamentos, tendríamos que aumentar el presupuesto a 1.300 millones de soles y por lo tanto sí había un efecto negativo. Al día siguiente, a la directora de IGEMI la cambiaron y la sacaron del cargo por decir esas cosas, y eso fue cosas que se vivieron en el país, ¿no? Entonces, las políticas comerciales también, los gobiernos juegan un rol importante dentro de esta negociación. Los peruanos teníamos estos datos, se realizaron, el Perú ya tiene negociaciones con muchos países, o sea, no necesitamos TPP porque con 6 de los 11 países ya teníamos negociaciones. Se realizaron más o menos 5 movilizaciones en el país exigiendo que la salud no se negocia, que los precios no podemos aceptar nuevas formas de monopolio porque la salud se encuentra en juego. Estas son movilizaciones, 5 movilizaciones que se realizaron en el país. Muchos jóvenes entendieron, eso fue un tema importante. Los datos movilizan, la evidencia moviliza, sensibiliza, y es algo que hemos logrado en el país, sensibilizar a los ciudadanos para salir a defender algo que estamos seguros que es así, y no solamente por la evidencia, sino porque la OMS también lo dijo, porque lo dijo las Naciones Unidas, porque el episcopado también hizo una carta diciendo que este acuerdo comercial afectaba el acceso a medicamentos y ponía en riesgo las vidas de los ciudadanos. Estos son documentos que salieron. Finalmente, resultado del proceso, hay una sensibilización en la población sobre los altos precios que existen cuando se da un monopolio. Otro resultado fue que la debilidad de los órganos reguladores quedó en evidencia cuando existe una política de apertura comercial agresiva que pretende esconder los datos que los ciudadanos sabemos y que los órganos técnicos sabemos. Los tratados de libre comercio con componente de propiedad intelectual afectan el acceso a medicamentos. ¿Se puede firmar un acuerdo comercial sin propiedad intelectual? Sí, pues. El país tiene 13 acuerdos comerciales y solo con Estados Unidos incluyó el capítulo de propiedad intelectual. Con la Unión Europea fue retirado. Entonces, fácilmente pueden correr los acuerdos comerciales sin el capítulo de propiedad intelectual porque el único objetivo es buscar nuevas formas de que la industria farmacéutica obtenga monopolio. Y finalmente, quedó claro que la salud en el país no se negocia. Gracias.
Thank you, Javier, for illustrating civil society advocacy in Peru. To conclude the session, I'd like to welcome Mohammed El-Sayed, who will talk about surviving in an unhealthy TRIPS Plus world. He's a professor of international trade and IP law at Lancashire Law School in the UK, and he works as a consultant with several international organizations, including the WHO, on IP and public health. You have the floor.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and good morning. I would like first to thank and congratulate the organizers for their ability to gather all these beautiful minds and souls in one room. And I'm sure we all agree that this has been of a plus standard, not a TRIPS plus standard, but this meeting has been of a plus standard for all. So I would like to thank them for this effort. Those who are familiar with the region would understand the difficulty of asking an Arab to summarize his thoughts in under than 10 minutes. However, I'm going to exercise my best endeavors to achieve that purpose within the prescribed time. I think in general terms, the debate shaping access to medicines and public health has been shaped by a number of factors and developments in the health arena. So surely the prices of medicine now is officially acknowledged as an international challenge, not only for developing countries. Many individuals and citizens living in the developed countries themselves are unable now to cater for the increasing prices of medicines. The latest addition to this was just the recent medicine a couple of weeks ago, which was approved and labeled as the most expensive medicine in the world, it's about a gene therapy, obviously to treat a rare form of blindness. The price of this medicine is $425,000 for each eye. So obviously, we are going to see more and more increase in prices. At the same time, there's been obviously a lack of real innovation in general terms over the previous, obviously, decades in the pharmaceutical industry in terms of R&D. Okay. That's okay. Thank you. And at the same time, we've also experienced an increase in the number of granted patents, which obviously do not have a major value, major contribution in the field. These are more bad quality. And therefore, these three challenges are obviously contributing to making access to medicines a much more difficult, if not impossible, obviously, issue in many countries worldwide. I think the focus on TRIPS Plus for many years has been to analyze bilateral free trade agreements, regional agreements, and so forth. But I think there's also been a number of cases where unilateral and national legislations have actually included TRIPS Plus conditions without having any international commitments. And these, for many, has been obviously unrecognized. They've been included under national laws for various reasons, due to lack of understanding on the impact. I came across a number of cases where customs legislations introduced TRIPS Plus measures unilaterally without understanding, including the patents, for example, subjecting them to obviously measures, border measures, and so forth. So I think while the focus has been on bilateral free trade agreements in the past, we've also seen a number of TRIPS Plus commitments arising under national laws through unilateral, obviously, initiatives. I think clearly the list of TRIPS Plus continues to grow. This is an unexhaustive list of TRIPS Plus commitments that we've been confronted with during the past decade or so. And obviously, historically speaking, each agreement tended to add more and more commitments to the previous ones. I mean, I think the experience of the region demonstrates the impact of this. While the first FTA with the US back in 2001 with Jordan contained 4 pages of intellectual property commitments, subsequent agreements in the region with Oman and Bahrain, for example, included up to 25 pages of IP commitments. So the trend has been obviously observed on the upward side of things. Obviously, the debate about this has been encouraged by the involvement of civil society and additional work on impact assessment. A couple of years ago, I would be struggling to actually present cases on the impact of TRIPS Plus. to policymakers. However, I had to delete a lot of the slides last night because now we have, thankfully, a large number and growing literature on the impact. And I think, as my colleagues on this session has demonstrated, there's enough evidence now to be able to put it up front and try to convince policymakers about this. I think the case of Jordan's study of Oxfam and the Dominican Republic studies, and I think the other studies referred to earlier in this session, obviously are providing a great assistance for policymakers to be able to look and understand the negative impacts coming out of these commitments. So this has been obviously an important addition to the current debate, and we're at least now able to demonstrate that there has been a negative impact. While in the past there's been a speculation, now we're relying more and more heavily on well-established evidence, obviously, to support in that direction. So the question is what to do about TRIPS Plus commitments. I mean, the easy answer would be to not accept them. And however, hindsight is a beautiful thing, and I guess there has been a number of cases where this is no longer an option. The issue with this now is we have agreements that have been in place for at least 15 years, as in the case of Jordan, and other countries have obviously subsequently followed suit. Quite a significant number of policymakers who were involved in these agreements are no longer in their positions. However, patient groups, populations, and the needy are still here, and they need to be able to coexist with such commitments. So I think one area where there's been little done in terms of research is how countries have actually managed to implement TRIPS Plus commitments under the national law in a way that has actually tried to mitigate the negative impact. The message is clear, is that TRIPS Plus rules are obviously will have a negative impact. However, now that you live with them, you need to actually be able to try to mitigate and limit the impact with whatever policy space remains in this area. I think Australia is providing one of the interesting cases in this field. In 2013, there's been a widely reviewed report, the Harris Report, which has actually started acknowledging the problem. And I think that would be the most important issue to look at for those TRIPS Plus countries, is that they need to recognize that there has been, to a certain extent, a decision that has affected negatively policymakers, and therefore they need to have an awakening that they want to address this problem from its roots. I think the Australian report has then started to already make some recommendations in terms of having establishing a national committee to study the current regime in Australia and come up with conclusions aimed towards limiting and minimizing the negative impact of evergreening and patent extension terms. And some of these recommendations are obviously confining the extensions of patents to a certain specific cases. The patent claims should include at least one pharmaceutical substance. The product included in the Australia Register of Therapeutic Goods. Marketing approval was issued less than 5 years after the filing of the patent. These are conditions, obviously, for the granting of the extension. Obviously, this does not eradicate the issue of patent extension, but rather provides some limitations and obviously tries to minimize that negative impact. I think Peru has also included a similar approach in terms of trying to as well limit that negative impact of the TRIPS Plus commitments, defining new chemical entities narrowly and in more detail, in a sense, under the national law to allow for less granting of these substances. And again, in cases where undisclosed data is necessary to determine the safety and efficacy of such product, the authorities will protect such data if generating it has involved considerable efforts. And again, we go back into the need for having a creative implementation and interpretation under national laws by policymakers. Defining what is a considerable effort, obviously, is something that could grant a bit more of flexibility. And again, the 5 years term would obviously have to start from the date of the product is approved, in, obviously in countries wherever that is with a sanity monitoring or approval regime. Again, Chile has also introduced a number of limitations on the TRIPS Plus impact, which is obviously trying again to deal with data exclusivity. And these are extremely helpful in the sense of restoring some of that lost policy spends out of the national law. I think the case of Jordan is one of the earlier cases of TRIPS plus models, and now there have been reforms and calls for reform by obviously the Jordanian Food and Drug Authority, and they're actually now making a number of recommendations about limiting the impact of the commitments of the FTA, such as the shortening the time of data exclusivity for new chemical entities. Currently, it's 5 years. No one knows why that term was actually mentioned, because it is not referred to under the FTA itself. So now there are calls to actually shorten that term, start data exclusivity to be the first registrant of the product worldwide, again, trying to kick off that process at an earlier stage, and obviously several other recommendations in that sense. So again, the effort is there to try to minimize the negative impact for TRIPS+. Policymakers do understand now that some of these commitments obviously contain the highly negative impact on access to medicines in these countries, and they're obviously taking some measures to restore that. So again, we always need to remind ourselves and policymakers that IP legislations are not just about obviously access to medicines. There is a whole set of checks and balances and infrastructure that operates within the IP regime itself that needs to be in place as well. And all the issues I think raised earlier through the session taken into consideration, the role of the patent offices, the competition role of judiciary, and obviously at the same time trying to experiment and consider other alternative models, obviously would fall within this context. And I think the final message here is obviously TRIPS Plus is a minus policy space that all officials should be reminded with, obviously, and the negative impact arising from such commitments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. I especially liked how you emphasized the importance on legal language and how people need to really look at them and make sure they're interpreted and defined in a way that can't be manipulated by the wrong persons. So we have time for a couple of questions. So if anybody has questions, please line up at the microphones and panel can answer. Does anyone have questions? Could you just go over to the microphones at the side over there?
Thanks for the wonderful presentation from all the panelists. I am Gopakumar. I work with the Third World Network. So the TRIPS Plus is the what you call elephant in the room, and we started no TRIPS, and now saying no TRIPS Plus, but considering the legitimization of even the TRIPS Plus, could you also think about the flexibilities available within TRIPS Plus, because there are certain countries who have already adopted TRIPS Plus. It is important for the social movements and the civil society to push back on one side the TRIPS Plus, and at the same time there might be some more flexibilities available. That does not mean that I am saying that countries not accepted till now to accept it. Okay, those like countries like Jordan or Morocco, or even some other countries in the region, like I am aware that like Egypt, which has an TRIPS Plus with IFTA. So these countries, it's a reality, and there is a need to how you can minimize the damage. From that perspective, any reflections from any of the panelists? Because when I was looking at the TRIPS TPP, I found that there are damages, but still there are certain maneuvering space. So I think we need to think about that also. Thanks.
Any of the panelists would like to respond?
So I think, back to the initial discussion with the panelists themselves, I think the best way to ensure that there is at least an understanding about the implications of this at the policymakers level is to have a national stakeholder participation in these kind of negotiations. I think I know we've been talking about this for years. It's still actually a major weakness in the current systems we have in many parts of the developing countries. There's lack of coordination, lack of understanding of the national weaknesses and strengths in terms of the capacity of pharmaceutical production, in terms of capacity of understanding how the health care regime works, and therefore there would still be emphasis that this is not a purely legal issue. We need to go back to the basics, that this is a much wider issue that contains human rights implications, development policy implications, and of course, reliance on all active players with this and stakeholders in this context is essential. Unless we really change mentality about how to address these things, I'm afraid that the cycle of TRIPS Plus will continue to grow.
Responding to each question, okay. So I think, just to make a comment about that, yes, it's important. We've been trying to also raise some awareness around that. Of course, we don't want the TRIPS Plus measures to be adopted. We are fighting against them, but if they are going to be adopted, at least that they have some room to try to reduce the impacts. Is the case with data exclusivity, for instance, that we say, well, if you are going to adopt, at least put some clauses that can allow for a compulsory license, like in the case of Malaysia, that they have some kind of compulsory license of data exclusivity. I don't really know what it's called in legal terms, but I understand that not all countries have that. So I think it's important for the policymakers to have those flexibilities and those possibilities within their toolbox, or within their toolbox when they are doing the negotiations. But of course, us as civil society, and we are still trying to say no to the adoption of those, but there's still a need to gather the best practices among the different countries, because they are loose out there. But I personally don't really know a study where we can have the best examples in the laws. In Peru, they have been doing some creative interpretation of the laws as well. So I think we can try to put those examples together in a more easily way to be consulted when these measures, when they are being negotiated, to at least try to have some flexibilities in case they are adopted.
Could I add a few words?
Quickly.
Yeah, very quickly. I would like to stress the experience of Ukraine. The biggest role plays an all-Ukrainian network organization and the civil society. And we were really impressed that it was both necessary to explain for our governmental officials, for our stakeholders, from State Patent Department even, the influence, the impact of TRIPS Plus negative impact into the Ukrainian industry. Not only in the sphere of healthcare, it's important, but we have to look for our partners in other branches, for example, agricultural sectors and so on, to lobbying our draft law, and you understand the political part of this. So the civil society plays a great role in Ukraine really today, and our lawyer society, academy society also join our efforts with civil society. So it's possible to look for neighboring instrument to restrict the impact of TRIPS Plus. And let's join our efforts. Thank you.
Okay, in the interest of time, can we go to the next question?
Yeah. Well, I have actually two questions. One of them is on the methodologies. I think, why don't we use some also qualitative methods to get evidences to show the impact of the TRIPS agreements? And what are the best methodologies to have a dialogue with governments, but also with the population we work with and need to mobilize? So this is one point. Now, what is evidence, actually? I think that some ethnographic data and qualitative data could also be very useful for that dialogue, but we are not using them or exploring them so far. despite they exist? This is one question I would like to hear from you. The other question is related to this recognition of the pressure of civil society. Danielle stressed that very well, but I would like to call attention of people that we are facing a lack of resources for advocacy. Very, very few agencies in the world are paying for advocacy work. If we didn't have these 4 or 5 agencies, we wouldn't be here to talk about these issues. Even in Brazil, with all the recognition and the good dialogue we have with some sector of the government, we, at ABIA, with lots of work we've been presenting here, we never got any money from of public resources, because it's money, it's not money of the government, it's public resources to do that work. Mostly it's with international funds. So I think it is important to recognize, but it's also important to mobilize national resources in public resources to support civil society work for the benefit of the public good. So I just wanted to call attention of that, of the issue of funding, because it is very, very scarce. We are facing, if it's not UNITAID, if it's not OSF, we will not be here, no? And no pressure at all. Just
okay, can the panelists just hold on to their questions? Can we take Jamie's question and Brooke's question, then the panelists can respond. Jamie?
Yes, thank you. I mean, the presentations were sobering. The discussions of the challenges and the pressures and the lobbying and things like that. I think it illustrates, particularly if you look at it historically, because it's not like the conversation today gives rise to a lot of optimism. If you look at where the conversation was at maybe 10 years or 15 years ago, it's like things are getting worse, not better overall, in terms of the challenges that people face. I think the discussion that TRIPS Plus or TRIPS is sort of something to push back. I mean, our position is, and I think a growing number of people's position is, that to challenge the grant of the monopoly as the fundamental problem. The evidence that you can regulate the monopolies effectively is not very strong. I mean, I spent most of my time trying to regulate the monopoly, doing the same thing everyone up there is doing, but I just don't feel like it's the only battle we should be fighting. And if you're going to try and challenge the grant of the monopoly in the first place, you have to have a story about how you address the research and development cost without the grant of the monopoly. That's what that delinkage debate is at, which isn't really part of a program on this in this summit, but I think it should have been. I mean, Joe Stiglitz, the South Center, MSF, Oxfam, our group, a growing number of civil society groups, academics, governments, UN resolutions, the UN high-level panel focused on this idea that the separation of the incentive for research and development from the price of the drug should be the goal toward the future. The Lancet Commission on Essential Medicines, they made the same kind of endorsement. The only way I think you can get rid of these challenges on high prices is just to declare that high prices should not be the mechanism for the incentive for research and development. And you have to find a different way, because otherwise you're always pitting innovation against access. And that doesn't play out well where I live, and it doesn't play out well in Europe, and it's not playing out well in developing countries right now. And so that was just the point I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
Brooke.
So I just wanted to address the question of ameliorating the bad effects of TRIPS Plus provisions. And I think, by and large, we understand that TRIPS Plus is like eating glass. And you can grind the glass a little bit more and maybe smooth some edges, but that doesn't mean eating glass is a good idea. So our advocacy really, always, is first and foremost, avoid TRIPS Plus. Don't give in to TRIPS Plus. Demand that TRIPS Plus be removed if accepted. That's not to say that there won't be some experts who give advice on how to try to minimize the most adverse consequences. But I think as civil society advocates, our goal is much clearer, which is simply to insist that TRIPS Plus not occur.
Panelists like to respond or comment?
I have here. To Veriano, we use the IPRIA because there were other studies in the region and we wanted to compare. But as Javier said, we need more methodology. So it's something that everybody wants. So in regards to the funding, of course, this is a critical issue. We don't have many funders. I would say with the time we were losing some funders. Like for example, in Latin America, we had Robert Carr, and also we had aid funds, but it seems that the funders are not prioritizing Latin America. So this is critical, so I thank the comment. And for Jamie, I don't think it's research and development against access. I think it's business against access. This is what this is about. Thank you.
Okay, apologies to anyone else who wanted the questions answered. We really don't have any time left. So thank you all panelists for that brilliant discussion. I'd just like to welcome ITPC for the announcements.
Hello, non, je vais parler en français. Juste, s'il vous plaît, on a 15 minutes de pause. Respectez ce temps. Par ailleurs, à la pause de cet après-midi, on va faire une photo de groupe. Donc je vous invite tous à être présents. Ensuite, pour les speakers, s'il vous plaît, nous aimerions avoir le plus tôt possible vos biographies ainsi que les présentations que vous allez transmettre à Détric qui est au fond. Enfin, pour les retardataires, nous voulons que la question des per diem soit réglée. Donc, s'il vous plaît, adressez-vous à l'accueil avec votre formulaire. Et donc, pour ceux qui partent aujourd'hui, pareil, vous pouvez bénéficier d'un transport pour l'aéroport. Pareil, faites-vous connaître à l'accueil. T-shirt rouge. Bonne pause.